Hi, I'm Bill Blain, strategist at Shard Capital. Today, let's think about climate change and energy transition. It's become the great challenge to capitalism, but there is no reason to fear it. It's complex, but it's infinitely solvable. The technologies exist today to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 at a cost far less than all the climate doomsters fear. Now I'm recording this video on the 21st of December. It's the winter solstice, and it's also the 30th anniversary of switching on the first UK wind farm in Delabole in Cornwall. Now, whatever you believe about climate change, there is an extraordinary outpouring of invention and innovation around the globe in renewable tech and climate solutions. At worst, these will improve our environment measurably by making them less polluted, and at best, they may well mitigate climate change. Now, energy transition is one of the key themes that wakes me up every morning, and I want to make sure we get it right. Unfortunately, that means I often find myself on the wrong side of the argument, ranting against the distortions of ESG, that's environmental, social, and governance-based investment, which I consider to be pretty close to wokery, and warning about how overly zealous green politics could make things 1,000 times worse. But let's start off by what do we mean by energy transition? It means transforming global energy supply to improve the environment and avoid the consequences of climate change. Many people believe it's too late, it's impossible, and the only solutions are a radical destruction of capitalism. There are still others who believe it's not happening at all, but hey, best to be prepared just in case they're wrong. But what if I was to also tell you the right mix of existing energy transition strategies could mean we successfully decarbonize and reach carbon neutrality easily by 2050? And let me add sugar to that. Let me tell you that any confusion about carbon neutrality should be dismissed. We can do it without destroying the global economy through high costs or sinking it through ill-considered ESG environmental Talibanism. Hey, it's not going to be easy. Energy transition is going to be a challenge. By 2050, we need to remove some 80 gigatons of carbon dioxide every year from the atmosphere. That's up from 50 gigatons today as a result of economic growth, and the global population is still growing. Depressingly, the largest source of CO2 emissions today comes from a result of deforestation, 11%. That's the equivalent of cutting our lungs out even as we struggle to breathe. As I said, it won't be easy to change the world. If governments aren't seen to be getting it right, then the ground will shift beneath them. The increasingly strident climate change protest lobby will cause even greater destabilization, making climate change mitigation even less likely. To move forward, we need to stop fearing climate change and see energy transition for what it is. It's an enormous opportunity for everybody, and it all depends about how we go about it. There's even a bright future for the oil business, not producing fuel, but all the other oil derivatives that we use in modern economies, like plastics, recyclable of course, adhesives, rubbers. All these things sequester carbon away, and they're vital for global growth. Now, I was asked during an interview last week to name my biggest threat to markets in 2022, and my response was energy costs. I've been watching China. It's facing a desperate gas shortage right through this whole decade. Energy bottlenecks tend to be long term. It means China is now burning more coal for power than ever before because they can't get enough gas. That's resulted in a quadrupling of coal costs this year, even as energy costs have gone through the roof. The economic threat to China of that energy imbalance is immense, and it's no wonder the Chinese Communist Party has told industry to secure its power and energy at any cost. Now, the knock-on effects of Chinese demand for energy partly underlie the spiralling cost of energy in Europe. The reality, though, is that gas shortages are partially caused by ESG enforced underinvestment. The end result is, because we're not producing enough gas, is that the global economy is going to burn 2 extra gigatons of coal every year this decade than we expected to. Far from cutting emissions, the ESG impact of banning fossil energy financing is resulting in increased coal burning. That's not a good result. Now, the price and source of energy is just one aspect of energy transition. More important are the consequences. Now, it does worry me that some of the smartest fund managers I speak with tend to regard energy transition as a simple switch between coal yesterday, oil and gas today, and electric vehicles, wind, solar, and hydrogen tomorrow. Box ticked, everything sorted. They don't seem to grasp that transition is incredibly complex, it's evolving, it's multi-connected, and it's very interrelated. The consequences of doing one thing impact others. For instance, if you change the cost of steel by making metallurgical coal insanely scarce and expensive, by stopping any investment in coal, then it pushes up the price of anything that uses steel, which includes solar, wind, and nuclear power, all the renewables. Electric vehicles are another good example of limited consequential thinking. Now, the current valuations of electric vehicle manufacturers are absolutely insane, as we all know, but let's assume they're right. That means we're going to see millions and millions of electric vehicles all needing batteries in the next few years. And to do that, we are going to need to mine, literally, every single atom of lithium on the planet, which is going to create enormous social costs and environmental damage, let alone then refitting all national grids to enable electric vehicle charging stations. Now, long term, we'll find solutions which are probably hydrogen based, but in the short term, we might be heading the wrong direction. Now, fortunately, there is a really simple way to learn about energy transition. He's a chap called Rob West, and he runs the rather spectacularly named energy consultancy Thunder Said Energy. I love that name. He recently updated his annual roadmap on decarbonising global energy, the route to net zero. Rob's conclusion is that we can successfully abate the 2050 carbon dioxide zero target and even exceed it. And he's come to that conclusion by doing the work. He has dug through more than 120 different economic models, 750 different research papers, looked at an innumerable number of patents while updating and re-examining the costs and returns of every single carbon abatement approach. He sees energy transition not as a simple binary game of EVs or diesel, but as a game of chess. And his trick is to take the time to understand the whole board and to understand how the enormously complex transition machine ticks. He is without doubt the grand master of energy transition. Now, far from energy transition being a choice between wind, solar, hydrogen, and electric vehicles, Rob has broken out of these small silos and identified not 4, but some 70 different technologies that could contribute towards net zero. His conclusions are absolutely startling. The right mix of CO2 mitigation strategies and tech approaches could achieve carbon neutrality faster and at a lower than expected cost, placing an entirely manageable 1.5% drag on global GDP at a cost of around $40 to $120 per tonne of saved CO2. Now, that is massively cheaper than many other analysts expect. They fear a cost of $400 to $800 per tonne of CO2 mitigation. And year by year, Rob's numbers are actually getting better. And that's not a surprise, because the technology is improving and evolving exactly as we would expect as the world wakes up to climate change and the need for energy change. To cut carbon emissions to zero, we still need to transition from non-fossil renewable energy in the long term, but except for the next few decades that involves a mid-term transition from full coal to gas before we go wholly renewable. However, the really exciting developments in energy change are in other areas. How much more efficient new tech is becoming. We're seeing massive improvements and rising innovation within areas like carbon capture, utilization, and storage technologies, and a growing realization that nature-based carbon dioxide removals through approaches like soil improvement could remove massive amounts of the CO2 overload. The technologies, Rob has concluded, will be able to mitigate climate change without crushing the global economy are generally the cheaper ones. They're between the $40 and $120 I mentioned earlier. Now, unfortunately, that's going to disappoint the legions of disruptive tech investors who think it's all about embracing expensive new concepts like electrofuels, floating wind farms, hydrogen trucks. Now, unfortunately, they will eventually get there, but they're likely to prove prohibitively expensive at something like over $800 per tonne of carbon abatement. And they're a long way from commercial feasibility. Now, I'm not saying they're not going to happen, they're just not necessary for carbon neutrality. The tech that will work includes the simple, cheap solutions like renewable timber, biochar from waste, things like working from home, improving the existing renewable technologies we're already using, new nuclear solutions and building more nuclear capacity, soil improvement, I've mentioned it already, manufacturing improvements and carbon efficiency. The big one, of course, is reforestation. I contribute towards planting trees, so should everyone else. Hybrid capacitors to improve the way that the grid works. Reducing methane leaks, another simple solution. You've got hydrogen fuel cells, it's hydrogen technology that already works. Insulation is an important one, although it is annoying when you get stopped on the M25 by insulation protesters. And then there's all these carbon capture things I talked about. Another big one is coal to gas. Yes, coal is a terrible polluter, so let's replace it with gas, which pollutes less. In the long term, we will replace gas. And there are technologies that allow us to decarbonize gas. And then there's things like geothermal power. Now, over the next 30 years, we are going to see energy transition occur, and it's going to occur across really 5 different areas, and they're all equally important. You've got the nature-based or offsets, like improving the soil and reforestation. That could cut 21 gigatons per annum of carbon emissions. You've got simple carbon capture technologies, another 8 gigatons of cuts. Simply greater efficiency and reduced better energy demand, that could save us 22 gigatons per annum. The switch that I was mentioning from coal to gas, 16 gigatons per annum, and continuing to develop new renewable power sources, that will cut a further 15 gigatons by 2050. According to Rob at Thundersaid Energy, the beauty is that 87% of the technologies necessary to achieve carbon neutrality already exist. They could be innovated now, if only they could be funded. The problem is that carbon neutrality by 2050, whatever they say at the COP conference, is a very long-term target. Governments typically last between 4 and 8 years, and markets tend to focus very much on the here and now because they are typically short-termist in the returns they need to generate. They also tend to listen to the deals that shout loudest, which probably explains why Elon Musk is so successful. Hydrogen and electric vehicles are terribly sexy investments and lend themselves to talk about disruptive tech, so they tend to be very attractive to the speculative money. Wind and solar attracts money because they are seen to be easy, reliable, and relatively risk-free. The problem is they're not terribly efficient. If I then go to gas, which is one of the most important things we need to do, that's almost impossible to fund because any investor will say no the moment that fossil fuels are mentioned. But the evidence is all there. Because of gas shortages, coal emissions are increasing. We do really need to focus on a shift from coal to gas to get us back on track to net zero in 2050. But all the other things I've mentioned will certainly help as much, if not more. Now, if you are working in an investment fund that considers itself an investor in renewables or prides itself in its zero carbon investment credentials, and you aren't talking with Rob and Thundersaid Energy, I'll be delighted to make the introduction for you. I suspect I'm going to be talking an awful lot about the energy transition and how that's going to happen over the next couple of years. It's an exciting topic and one that I'm convinced we're going to succeed in. Since it's the end of 2021, let me hope you had a good year and wish you an even better year in 2022. Thank you all very much for your time. I'm Bill Blain, Shard Capital.